we're going to have a short presentation by John Wodak, who's a very experienced patient representative or patient advocate who's helped people apply for AISH and CPP over more than 20 years. Is that right? So he's going to give a very brief presentation. So go ahead, John.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, this is good. It's definitely not what I planned to be when I grew up. So I think I owe you some explanation. This is something that I learned as I went along. And I'm not a lawyer. I have no formal qualifications. I work with people who are applying and appealing for AISH and CPP because the government agencies don't care that I'm not qualified. And maybe they think it's easier that way. Anyway, better. Okay. This is my first teacher, my wife, Carol. She would like you to know, actually, she's watching this, so I have to behave myself. But she did want you to know that the ice cream was pistachio. Seriously, while Carol was working her way through the red tape, which I'm not going to go into any detail on, I was learning to come to terms with a wife who has a chronic illness. And the turning point came in about 1993, 94, when she wanted me to take her to a meeting of the Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Support Group. I did, and by the end of the meeting, I was a volunteer. Next slide, please, Mike. These are our therapists. We are great fans of pet therapy. Penelope, Penny for short, that's her on the left. She has affection deficit disorder, which makes her an extremely effective therapist. That's not to take anything away from Samantha, Sam for short. She's much less demonstrative, but still a great comfort. I need to make some acknowledgements. Next slide, please, Mike. The ME Society of Edmonton has been paying my out-of-pocket expenses for most of the last 20-odd years. And without them, I simply couldn't do this. Most of the people who come to me don't have a bean, and I can't charge them. So the usual deal is that when we get to the end of whatever the process is if they have anything to spare, they make a donation to the ME Society. The National MEFM Action Network has been a great support and a great comfort to me. And it's one of the best things I could have ever done was start networking with them. Next, please, Mike. So down to business. What is disability? I'm going to interject a little here. James mentioned that the date of diagnosis is not important for his purposes. It turns out to be incredibly important for CPP and AISH. And he also mentioned that he prefers the testimony of the family doctor. Well, so do I, except that again, CPP and AISH very much prefer the specialists. All four of the previous speakers have talked in terms of defining disability in terms of functional capacity, a person's ability to work, employability, however you want to phrase it. And they've all emphasized the importance of medical evidence in determining disability. And this is what's known as the medical model of disability. And the trouble is that each of the providers of benefits, whether it's the public, federal government, provincial governments, the CRA, or the private insurance industry, they all have a different culture. So what you can what you learn in one area doesn't necessarily apply in any of the others. Sometimes, and I don't like doing this, sometimes they use diagnosis as a proxy for functional capacity. They shouldn't, but they do, and some of the time it works and some it doesn't. But the thing is, and this is where we, James and Hugh and I definitely agree, is that it's not the diagnosis that determines whether or not someone is disabled. Diagnosis can be wrong. It's really only the symptoms. The only real value to a correct diagnosis is that it will define the treatment if there's one available. Can I have the next slide, please? Right. I'm going to show you a bunch of people who, in normal circumstances, would be considered to be disabled. The first two, Kent Hare was hit by a stray bullet in a drive-by shooting. This was while he was a student. He changed disciplines, completed his studies, qualified and practiced as a lawyer, and then was elected to Parliament in 2015, and he's currently the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Stephen Fletcher was an engineer. He hit a moose while driving to a job. It's something that could probably only happen in Canada, and has been a quadriplegic ever since. And he's currently a Manitoba member of the legislature, but he, before that, was elected to Parliament in 2004 and served as Minister of State in several portfolios. I particularly liked his comment during one of his election campaigns that he'd rather be paralyzed from the neck down than from the neck up. Next slide, please, Mike. Manon Perrot broke her back in a riding accident, and she was elected to Parliament in 2011 and served as the official opposition critic for persons with disabilities. Percy Wickman broke his back in a work accident and was subsequently served 3 terms as an Edmonton alderman and then 3 terms as an Alberta member of the legislature. He retired in 2001 and was appointed to the AISH appeal panels. That's in spite of being a strenuous advocate for people with disabilities. And next, please. You probably have all heard of Stephen Hawking, the astrophysicist who wrote the best-selling A Brief History of Time. He has Lou Gehrig's disease and was given 2 years to live. That was more than 50 years ago. And Christopher Reeve, I hope this isn't dating me, but Superman, another riding accident, and until his death, he was a prominent advocate for spinal cord injury research. The point I want to make is that all of these people came to terms with their disabilities, which is not easy, and led or are leading productive lives in spite of their conditions. And it's worth asking how they managed to do this, and why it's not possible for everyone to do the same thing. So next, please. So as I said, it's not purely a medical issue. We need to consider, among other things, and I like to pick on 2 things in all of my examples. First, that they all had a characteristic or talent that potential employers or voters in terms of for the politicians believed to be sufficiently valuable that they would make the necessary accommodations. That doesn't happen to everybody. Second, they all have or had a very supportive environment that enabled them to focus on their work. And wasn't it you, James, who said compare this with a hypothetical single mother with 2 kids under 10? You know, what are you going to ask them to do? I know that the Canada Pension Plan adjudicators have recognized this concept of a benevolent employer. I've never actually come across any of these agencies that would recognize the family circumstance. Yeah. Next, please. So this is the comment that I get most often. I had no idea it was going to be like this. In some ways, becoming disabled, it's I think the psychological equivalent of being dunked in ice cold water. I don't know. You ever tried the polar bear swim? No. I sometimes like to think of it in terms of some sort of analogy of the 5 stages of grieving, but I gathered from reading about this that the professionals aren't altogether enthusiastic about that. But certainly the process starts with somebody saying, why did this have to happen to me? Their anger, they're in denial. They focus on their work to the exclusion of everything else. But by the end of the process, we hope they've accepted what's going on. I do have a theory that they won't normally apply for whatever benefits are going until they get to the acceptance stage. And I'm still arguing with CPP about that. Next, please. I think we're all agreed on this, that if you're truly disabled, you need help. You need help with all of these things that I've listed on the right. And you can turn for help to these agencies on the left. A lot of people don't realize that if they've been in a union job, a unionized job, or they belong to a professional association, that they can turn to these agencies for help. And I recommend that because those outfits have more resources than I do. People like the support groups will understand the condition better than most. The friend or relative is someone who knows the before and after you, and so on. And on the right, all these items that you need help with, or you need, they may or may not all be contained in one person's or firm. Finally, last slide, please. We've mentioned the MEFM Action Network. That book on the left, which is on the display table outside, this is commercial, Ellie.
Yep.
Is a guide to CPP disability, which I helped to write, and which the network published. And we like to think it's helpful. Now, Hugh, I think, mentioned that it's not the diagnosis that matters, but the functional capacity, the limitations. And the back of that guide, which is also available on the internet, there is a set of questionnaires and worksheets that anyone could use to assess their capacity and use that as a basis for a disability application. And finally, I'm going to answer Ellie's question of what one thing would I change if I had a chance, and I'm doing this with deference to the lawyers. Um, all the benefits we are talking about are governed one way or another by either law, that's the government benefits, or by a contract which can be enforced in the courts. That's the disability benefits. Now, application of the law through this due process is supposed to lead to a just decision. And justice needs to be seen to be done. And I can't always see that in cases of disability insurance, disability benefits, justice isn't always done. It's one of these issues that somehow the standard due process doesn't seem to handle very well. Another example would be sexual assault. And so I'd like to see that changed. I don't know how it would change, but I think it should be. That's it.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.